On this Wednesday night, the wallets of Canadians get squeezed even further. The Bank of Canada raises its rate again. The broader implications of rising debt.
Our social cohesion is suffering.
Plus, the hint rate hikes will be paused. Ramping up reinforcements, Germany and the U.S. agree to send tanks to Ukraine. What about Canada? The Pope says homosexuality is not a crime and criticizes anti-gay laws. Plus, saving endangered stories of a Montreal suburb.
I'm doing a service to the kids who are growing up here.
One man's labor of love.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a major development that could change the direction of the war in Ukraine. Germany and the U.S. have agreed to send battle tanks to Ukraine. The German government also clearing the way for other countries, including Canada, to send German-made tanks. Ukraine has lobbied for this for months. President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff said today the tanks will form a crushing fist against Russia. Tanks are primarily offensive weapons and could be used to drive out Russian forces from areas they've occupied, and that the Russian embassy in Berlin has said will take the conflict to a new level of confrontation. Eric Sorensen reports.
It is a potential turning point in the war. German-made Leopard tanks will soon be on their way to Ukraine from all over Europe, more modern firepower than Ukraine has had up to now. Big announcements came from both sides of the Atlantic. In Berlin, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, after weeks of pressure from allies, announced that Germany would send tanks to Ukraine.
Vertrauen Sie mir, vertrauen Sie der Bundesregierung.
Trust me and trust the German government, said Scholz, addressing historic concerns about Germany's expanding role in a European war, stating this is in coordination with the international community. In Washington, U.S. President Joe Biden, for the first time, committed American offensive firepower, 31 advanced M1 Abrams tanks.
That's what this is about, helping Ukraine defend and protect Ukrainian land. It is not an offensive threat to Russia.
But how will Moscow view this? Reason enough to use even more deadly weapons? Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke to students today but did not directly address the tanks for Ukraine. Putin said Russia's goal is to defend itself and the territories that it claims.
Clearly what we're going to see happening is threats from the Russians that if you do this, then we will have to respond. But it's not clear exactly what they will do.
The countries promising German-made Leopard tanks include Germany with an initial commitment of 14 tanks, Poland 14 tanks, smaller numbers from Norway, Finland, the Netherlands, and Spain. The UK is sending 14 of its Challenger tanks. The US will send 31 Abrams tanks. What Canada and other countries will decide is uncertain. Just a week ago, Ottawa pledged to send 200 armored personnel carriers to Ukraine. But will Canada send any of its own Leopard tanks?
We will continue to be there to give whatever support we can to Ukraine. I won't be making an announcement today, but I can tell you we are looking very, very closely at what more we can do to support Ukraine.
The first tanks for Ukraine will obviously come from Europe. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky sent thanks, first to the German Chancellor for sending tanks and for the green light for other countries to do likewise, then hours later to President Biden for American tanks, declaring, "Today the free world is united as never before." Russia is expected to launch a new offensive in the spring. What's not clear is whether a fortified Ukrainian military could shorten the war or prolong it. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
So back to that question of where does this leave Canada? The Prime Minister not ruling out sending some of our Leopard 2 tanks. Mercedes Stephenson is with me from Ottawa. Mercedes, what are you hearing?
Donna, I'm hearing there could be an announcement about Canada sending tanks as soon as tomorrow, that both the political and military level are gearing up to try to find a way to send some Canadian tanks. But the options we have are limited. Canada only has 82 main battle tanks that are capable of actually fighting. Let's take a look at what some of those options are. The first type is the 2 A4Ms. We only have 20 of those, and some of them may be destined for Canadian troops in Latvia. Then we have have the 2 A6Ms. We only have 20 of those as well. They were heavily used in Afghanistan, and they are booked for retrofit. Finally, we have the Leopard 2 A4s. There are 42 of them, and they aren't used for deployments in Canada. We only use them for training. But the military sources I spoke to say they're still better than anything that Russia is using right now in Ukraine, and that a number of allies are deploying these so they would be interoperable. I spoke to the former chief of the defense staff, Rick Hillier, about what he thought about a potential tank deployment, and this is what he had to say.
We've got to play our role, and we've got to do those things. And yes, will it cost us? Of course it will. But that's the price of freedom, that's the price of stability, and that's the price of having an environment in which Canada can thrive.
The question now is how many tanks? Too few, and it looks like tokenism. Too many, and it could gut the Canadian Army's capability. The military is worried about whether or not it will see replacement tanks, and all of these questions highlight the issue of defense spending and frustration by both Canada's allies and the military over what the government has invested.
Okay, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks. Ukraine has pulled its troops from the key town of Soledar in the Donetsk region. The military calls it an organized retreat to preserve the lives of personnel. Russia claims the town is critical to capturing all of the eastern Donbass region. It moves Russian forces closer to encircling the strategic city of Bakhmut. Ukraine's withdrawal is a rare battlefield victory for Russia after months of retreats. And one last note on Ukraine. It is President Volodymyr Zelensky's 45th birthday. His wife, Olena, posted this tribute. "I'm often asked about how you have changed this year," she writes, "and I always answer, he is the same guy I met when we were 17. But he smiles much less now." To Canada now, and news anyone renewing their mortgage was dreading. The Bank of Canada has hiked its benchmark interest rate again. Another attempt, it says, to reduce inflation. This 8th hike in less than a year puts the bank rate at 4.5%, the highest it's been since 2007. It only rose 25 basis points today, which is the smallest single increase seen since last March. That's a bit of a positive. So is word the bank is pausing rate hikes for now. As Gaviola reports, it's what Canadians struggling with debt wanted to hear.
The central bank expects inflation to ease to 3% by mid-year.
We know it takes time for higher interest rates to work through the economy to slow demand and reduce inflation. And given the speed and magnitude of the interest rate increases over the last year, their full effect is still to come.
It is the first major central bank to say it may pause on monetary policy tightening.
We are not out of the woods yet. So this coming March, when the Bank of Canada makes its next interest rate decision, we're kind of hoping that it's going to just hold steady at 4.5%.
Here's what the rate hike means for a typical variable rate mortgage on an average home in Toronto. Monthly mortgage payments jump to more than $2,800. That's an increase of $246. In Montreal, that works out to an extra $186 monthly.
According to polling by Ipsos exclusively for Global News, 54% are struggling to stay afloat financially. More than 1 in 5 say they're completely out of money and can't afford any more household expenses. Younger Canadians and women, groups that typically earn less and were disproportionately harmed financially during the pandemic, more likely to say they're on the brink. High inflation and climbing interest rates seem to be taking a broad social toll, too.
Our social cohesion is suffering. The data is very clear that, when faced with hardships, the attitude is more, I've got to take care of myself, and we are not in this together. And that has far-reaching implications.
Those implications include mistrust of businesses, politicians, and institutions, including the central bank. In another first, the Bank of Canada will share a summary of the debate that led to its decision, but we'll have to wait 2 weeks for that. It is the central bank's attempt to improve transparency on setting monetary policy. Donna?
All right, Gaviola, thanks. Now to developments at the retreat Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is holding with federal cabinet ministers in Hamilton, Ontario. A small but vocal group of protesters has been making their views known outside the hotel and the venue where the retreat is happening. Last night, they confronted ministers on the street. There's lots of swearing. We're only going to show you a small part of it. Protesters shouted profanities at Trudeau and some of his ministers, calling the Prime Minister a tyrant, among other things. There was a heavy police presence. The protests seemed to be about public health restrictions, which are no longer in place. Today, the Prime Minister was asked about the anger expressed.
It's really, really important in our democracy that people can express their disagreement or displeasure or even anger with various governments. That's really important. And at the same time, our police services and institutions will ensure that those protests remain peaceful and law-abiding.
The cabinet retreat wrapped up today with news about health care, or at least talks about health care. The Prime Minister has agreed to meet with the premiers next month. They have repeatedly asked for more money for health care. Setting up a meeting, though, doesn't guarantee a resolution. Turia Isri looks at the expectations.
The Liberals have wrapped up their three-day cabinet retreat in Hamilton, but it's a meeting that hasn't even happened yet, getting the most attention. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invited the premiers to Ottawa to try to hash out a funding deal on health care.
What we'll be doing in 2 weeks when we sit down is rolling up our sleeves and talking about what we're proposing as the shape of the path forward for health care in this country.
The date is set for February 7th, but Trudeau is trying to keep expectations low.
We're not going to be signing deals on that particular moment.
Despite the downplaying, the Liberals insist an agreement is within reach.
Or maybe we're coming around the final lap. I mean, pick your analogy. Maybe we're in the third period.
The invitation comes after a months-long impasse between the federal government and provinces. The Prime Minister insists a, quote, appropriate amount of money is on the table, but did not give a specific amount. Ottawa transferred $45 billion in healthcare spending to the provinces this year. The premiers want another $28 billion.
In the belief of all the premiers from the provinces and territories that if we could just get around a table together and talk it through, that we could get a deal.
The federal government plans to hammer out an agreement with each premier to address each province's healthcare priorities, all in exchange for certain conditions.
We need to share data better between provinces and better access to mental health care and a more modern health data system that will help save lives.
The system as a whole is overwhelmed, with clogged emergency rooms, surgery backlogs, and staff shortages. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says it's unbelievable a meeting with the premiers has taken this long.
What matters is that we get shorter wait times, more doctors and nurses, and faster approval of new drugs and treatments for our people.
More details on the premiers' meeting may trickle out later this week when the Liberal caucus meets for their retreat, the last strategy session before Parliament returns. Donna?
Okay, Turia Isri in Hamilton tonight. Thanks. Now to Toronto and those attacks on transit passengers and staff. The head of one of Canada's major transit unions is calling for a national task force to come up with potential solutions. In Toronto, it's happened again. Late this afternoon, a 16-year-old boy was stabbed on a bus, the fourth violent incident reported this week on the city's transit system. And this morning, 2 Toronto transit workers were reportedly chased by someone with a syringe. Neither employee was hurt. The suspect was arrested. Yesterday, a woman was stabbed on a streetcar, and on Monday, bus drivers were swarmed by a group of teenage boys. Toronto's Mayor John Tory says it's time to respond to what he calls Canada's mental health crisis. He wants a summit with leaders from municipalities, the premiers, and the federal government.
When we were, dealing with the pandemic together, we dealt with it together. We got the job done in a way that we could be proud of around the world. And I think it's time we took on something that's been around for a lot longer than the pandemic, namely mental health, and did exactly the same thing.
Members of municipal and provincial governments in Ontario say they support the idea. Canada's housing minister on the defensive. Coming up, why he is doubling down on contracts he gave to a marketing firm. An update now to a story Global News broke last week. Housing Minister Ahmed Hussen gave several federal contracts for political communications work to an agency that specializes in marketing food. And the agency's head is the sister of one of the minister's senior staff. Our reporter caught up with the minister to ask about all this. Mackenzie Gray is with me now. Mackenzie, what did he have to say?
Well, Donna, we've been trying to interview Ahmed Hussen for the past week. And when our team finally caught up with him, he wasn't happy to see the cameras.
Been trying to get an answer from your office.
I issued a statement to you, and the statement is very comprehensive. It addresses all.
The housing minister eventually stopped and defended giving $93,000 worth of constituency communications contracts to a food-oriented PR firm that is owned by a senior staffer's sister.
All the rules were followed. We checked with the Financial Management Office as well as proactively seeking the guidance of the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner.
We asked the Ethics Commissioner's office, and they wouldn't confirm what advice Mario Dion gave to the housing minister, or if they even spoke. Hussen even left the door open to giving Munch More Media more business.
Would you hire them again?
Well, I was happy with the services, and I was happy that they assisted me to communicate to my constituents.
Despite how pleased he was, Hussen's office declined to provide examples of work that the company did for him. The Prime Minister wouldn't say if he thought rehiring the firm would be appropriate.
It's important, of course, that people follow all the rules, and that's what we'll continue to ensure.
As for the company, they're trying to change their recipe for success, at least online. After taking down their website, they've posted a new one. It doesn't mention their political experience, but it bills the company as having an in-depth understanding of the media landscape. But they haven't forgotten their roots. We've been specializing in the food industry for many years, it says. Woman and Gender Equality Minister Marcia Ian seemed to miss that focus, despite giving the firm 2 contracts worth $10,000.
Are we sure that it was just a foodie PR firm? I can check with my constituency office, but as far as I know, Facebook ads were bought, and that's what was done.
Just like Hussen, Ian defended giving the contracts to Munch More Media, saying that she didn't know that the owner of the company was the sister of Ahmed Hussen's policy advisor. Donna?
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. A rare interview with the Pope ahead, what he said about homosexuality and his potential retirement. When Pope Francis took over as head of the Catholic Church 10 years ago, he made it clear he was going to do things differently. He lives a more frugal life than past popes, doesn't live in the official papal residence, and he's talking more to the media. Today, Pope Francis did an interview with Associated Press, sharing his views on retirement, his health, and homosexuality, sending a clear message to others in the Church. Crystal Gamansing reports.
Whether in the Vatican, the United Arab Emirates, or Canada, the 86-year-old pontiff has the ear of the world. And it appears Pope Francis wants everyone to know he's all right. He's just getting older. I'm in good health for my age. I'm normal. When Pope Benedict XVI died recently, questions surfaced about Francis's health and his future. Benedict sent shockwaves through the church as the first pope in 600 years to retire, citing old age and health concerns. Francis says if he were to resign, he would move to a residence for retired priests and bishops in Rome. At the end of January, the Pope will visit the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan, a pilgrimage that was postponed last year. The head of the Roman Catholic Church preaches peace and for a less judgmental community. That often leads to questions about the LGBTQ2 community. Being homosexual is not a crime. Speaking to the Associated Press in Spanish, he said laws focusing on same-sex activity are unjust. For advocates like Frank Teston, the Pope's words are essential for life and dignity.
I think his message today is a clear instruction to bishops worldwide to stop supporting the criminalization of homosexual romantic behavior.
The Pope did say it is a sin in the church, but he also pointed out it's a sin to lack charity.
It's a prophetic stance taken by the Pope, and I'm delighted to see it.
Especially when the words come before a papal visit to South Sudan, where same-sex activity between men is against the law. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
Blast from the past next, how a Quebec filmmaker is preserving a Montreal suburb's history. A Quebec videographer is on a mission to romanticize the suburbs, specifically the one where he grew up on Montreal's West Island. Jason Bolanis has enlisted the help of local seniors and historical archives in an effort to hold on to stories that might otherwise be lost. As Mike Armstrong explains, he wants to make the mundane memorable for his community's next generation.
Just where we are specifically was forest. There was little patches of forest.
This is one of those places with more history than most people realize. It's just a quiet corner in the town of Pointe-Claire, unless you're with Jason Bolanis.
But what happened here in 1953 was that there was a plane crash.
Right here?
Right here.
8 men died in that crash, but today it's mostly forgotten.
I remember parachutes stuck in trees.
Well, before it fades from memory, videographer Jason Bolanis interviewed people who were there when it happened.
It was horrible, but you couldn't save anyone. They were all dead.
It may be clear now that I have a slight obsession about the history of this place.
Now, that story is just one of dozens Bolanis has been collecting. He's produced a series on YouTube about the history of the suburbs where he grew up. Sometimes it's about things that happened, like the first air show in Canada in 1910.
People from all around the country came to see it.
You ever wonder what Halloween was like?
And sometimes it's just about what life was like, as forests and farms were replaced by houses.
The water would come up so high, the city would have to put some wood.
So why become an expert in suburban history?
Because no one's doing it. I got no competition.
Yeah. There may be a reason you don't have any competition.
Yeah, that's right. But I feel like I'm doing a service to the kids who are growing up here to know that they're not just growing up in suburbia, but they're growing up in a pretty interesting part of Montreal.
It does look quite unrecognizable.
Another part of this passion project is understanding how things developed the way they did and why. Bolanis says if you understand how we got here, life makes a bit more sense.
It also makes things not as serious to know that this is what ends up happening. This is a progressive evolution of things, so you don't take things too seriously when you're in the moment of something, you know? It helped me during the pandemic.
The woman that lived in this house.
With each story, Bolanis says he uncovers others. He's not likely to run out of ideas. He says he's actually having trouble just getting out of the 1950s.
Oh, can we use any of this yet?
Mike Armstrong, Global News, Pointe-Claire, Quebec.
Oh, I love that. That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's here in Canada is the Ganaraska Bridge in Port Hope, Ontario. Bye-bye.